43% of Americans aged 55 to 64 have $0 saved for retirement. The median retirement balance for boomers who did save is $22,000. Under the 4% rule, that's $670 a month. Add Social Security, subtract Medicare, you're looking at about $2,300 monthly. In an economy where a one-bedroom apartment averages $1,800. Here's my thesis. Boomers aren't broke because they were lazy or stupid. They're broke because they were handed a completely different game than their parents played, but nobody bothered to give them the new rulebook. They became the unwitting guinea pigs for the largest privatization experiment in American history. And the experiment failed. I'm going to walk you through exactly how this happened. Not with motivational nonsense about avocado toast or bootstrap lectures, but with the actual incentive structures, policy shifts, and mathematical realities that turned the most economically advantaged generation in history into Walmart greeters at age 70. Because once you see the system that was built around them, you realize this wasn't a failure of character. It was a failure of design. Think about retirement like a board game. Your parents sat down at a table with a specific set of rules. Work for one company for 30 years. Collect a pension that pays a fixed amount every month until you die. Supplement with Social Security, done. The corporation took the risk, managed the investments, guaranteed the payout. You just had to show up and do your job. Simple game, clear rules, predictable outcome. Now imagine you sit down at that same table in 1966, ready to play the same game. Except when you look down, the board is completely different. The pension squares are disappearing one by one. There are new squares labeled 401k and index fund and Roth IRA, but nobody's explained what those mean yet because they don't fully exist. And the dice? The dice are now tied to something called the market, which just spent 16 years going absolutely nowhere. But here's the thing. Everyone around you is still using your parents' instruction manual. Your boss, your financial advisor, even the government, they're all saying, just play like your parents did. Except the game isn't the same anymore. That's what happened to boomers. The rules changed mid-game, and most people didn't realize it until they were already losing. Let me tell you a story about a guy named Frank. Not a real guy I know personally, but a composite of about 10 conversations I've had. Frank graduated college in 1968, got an engineering job at a decent company, married his college sweetheart, did everything right. His dad had worked at the same plant for 35 years and retired at 60 with a pension that paid 70% of his final salary. Frank figured he'd do the same. Why wouldn't he? But here's what Frank didn't know. In 1966, the year he started thinking about his career, the S&P 500 was at 92. 16 years later, in 1982, it was at 102. For 16 years, the stock market went sideways. Actually worse than sideways when you account for inflation. If Frank had invested $1,000 in 1966, by 1982, it would have been worth about $500 in real purchasing power. He would have lost half his money by investing for the long term. So what did Frank's generation learn about the stock market? That it was a scam, a place where your money goes to die. This wasn't irrational fear, this was pattern recognition. And this is critical because when you're 20 years old and you watch the market do nothing for your entire 20s and early 30s, you develop a worldview. Stocks equal gambling. Gambling equals stupid. Smart people keep their money in savings accounts or buy real estate or just spend it because at least you get something tangible. This psychological imprint is the first escalation. The generation that would eventually be forced to bet their entire retirement on the stock market spent their formative wealth-building years watching that same market prove it was useless. But it gets better. While Frank was avoiding the market because it demonstrably sucked, the game board was being rewritten underneath him. In 1974, Congress passed ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Sounds good, right? It was supposed to protect pensions after a bunch of companies went bankrupt and workers lost everything. But here's how incentives actually work. ERISA made pensions really expensive to maintain. Suddenly, companies had to fund them properly, insure them, follow strict rules. And corporations looked at this and thought, or we could just not do pensions anymore. Then in 1978, buried in the tax code, a guy spots Section 401, subsection K, It was meant to let executives defer taxes on bonuses. But a benefits consultant named Ted Benna realized you could use it for regular employees. And companies saw this and had an epiphany. Instead of promising workers a fixed monthly payment for life, which is expensive and risky for the company, we could just let workers put their own money into accounts. Maybe match a bit, and boom, their retirement is now their problem. The risk just got transferred from the corporation to the individual. This is the second escalation. The system that guaranteed retirement got swapped out for a system that made retirement a personal responsibility, and it happened so gradually that most people didn't even realize they were now playing a completely different game. Here's where the irony gets almost comedic. By the mid-80s, Frank is finally starting to hear about 401ks. His company is phasing out the pension, offering this new thing instead. He's skeptical because, of course he is. He's watched the market be garbage for 2 decades. But then something weird happens. From 1982 to 2000, the market goes absolutely insane. The Dow goes from 800 to 11,000. Everyone's making money. CNBC launches, everyone's talking about mutual funds, and suddenly there are articles about 401k millionaires who maxed out their contributions and retired rich. Frank, now in his 40s, thinks, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this works. So he finally jumps in. 1992, somewhere in there. He starts contributing. Not the maximum because he's got 2 kids in college and a mortgage, but he's contributing. He's playing the new game. Except here's the problem. Frank is now 44 years old. He missed the entire compounding window. The years from 25 to 40 where money doubles 3 or 4 times. Those years are gone. He can't get them back. And worse, because he's trying to catch up, he's putting money into whatever's hot. Tech stocks, high growth mutual funds, aggressive allocations. Because the narrative in the 90s was that the market only goes up, so you might as well swing for the fences. By 2000, Frank's 401k looks pretty good. Not great, but decent. Maybe $150,000. He's thinking, if this keeps going for another 15 years, I might actually be okay. And then comes the third escalation, the dot-com crash. March of 2000, the Nasdaq loses 78% of its value over the next 2 years. Frank's 401k, which was heavily weighted toward tech because that's what was working, gets cut in half. He's 54 years old, and half his retirement just evaporated. Now you might think, okay, but it came back eventually, right? Sure. By 2007, the market recovered to about where it was in 2000. Frank's account is back to where it started 7 years earlier. He's now 61, planning to retire at 65, and hoping for one good bull run to actually build something. Then comes the fourth escalation, 2008, the financial crisis. The market gets cut in half again. Housing crashes, unemployment spikes to 10%. Frank's company does layoffs. He survives, but barely. His 401k is back down to maybe $80,000. He's 62, retirement age, and he has nowhere near enough to retire. So he keeps working. 5 more years, 10 more years. He's 71 now, still working part-time because Social Security pays $1,600 a month, and his 401k, even with some recovery, might give him another $400. $2,000 a month. That's the reality. Now let me show you the math on a real scenario. Let's say you're born in 1946, first year of the boomer generation. You graduate college in 1968. You start your career making, let's say, $8,000 a year, which was decent. If you had started investing 10% of your income immediately in 1968, and if you had stayed the course through the stagnation, through the crashes, through everything, and if you had gotten the historical average return of 10% by 2008, you'd have about $600,000. Not bad, but here's the reality. You didn't start in 1968 because the market was dead. You probably started around 1985 or 1990 after you finally believed it might work. You didn't invest 10%, you invested maybe 5% because you had kids and a mortgage. You didn't stay the course. You pulled money out during the crashes because you panicked or needed cash. and your actual return wasn't 10%, it was probably closer to 6 after fees and bad timing. So instead of 600,000, you ended up with maybe 100,000. And under the 4% rule, that's $4,000 a year, $333 a month. That's the difference between the theoretical path and the actual path most people walked. Here's a conversation I imagine happened 1,000 times. Boomer walks into a financial advisor's office in 1995. Advisor says, "You should have started investing 30 years ago." Boomer says, "The market was flat for 20 years. I would have lost money." Advisor says, "But it's different now. The market always goes up in the long run." Boomer says, "That's what they said in 1929. Advisor sighs, shows some charts. They eventually agree on a conservative portfolio. 5 years later, the dot-com bubble pops. Boomer calls advisor. "I lost 40%. Advisor says, "Stay the course, it'll come back." Boomer stays, market recovers. 2008 hits. Boomer calls again. "I lost another 40%. I'm 62. Advisor says, "Stay the course." Boomer says, "I don't have any more course to stay." This is where it gets really interesting, because now we have to ask, who actually benefited from this system change? Not boomers, clearly, but corporations saved billions by dropping pension obligations. Asset managers collected fees on trillions in 401k assets. The financial industry exploded in size. The entire wealth management sector exists because retirement went from a guaranteed benefit to a do-it-yourself project. This wasn't an accident. This was a very successful transfer of risk from institutions to individuals, dressed up as empowerment and personal responsibility. And the people who bore that risk had no idea they were even taking it on until it was too late. By 2025, the oldest boomers are 79, the youngest are 61. They're all at or past retirement age, and the statistics are brutal. 20% of Americans over 65 are still working, double the rate from 1985, not because they love their jobs, because they have to. The Walmart greeter you see, the Uber driver who's 70, the lady working part-time at Target, these aren't people who failed at life. These are people who played by the rules they were given, and the rules changed on them 3 times. First, pensions disappeared. Second, the market they were told to trust betrayed them twice. Third, wages stagnated while costs exploded, so even when they were working, they couldn't save enough to compensate for the lost time. Let me be clear about something. I'm not saying boomers are blameless. Some made bad choices, some spent too much, some ignored good advice. But when 43% of an entire generation arrives at retirement with nothing saved, that's not a personal failure. That's a systemic failure. You can't have a system where almost half the participants fail and claim the system works fine. The system is broken. And boomers were the first generation to fully experience that broken system because they were the transition generation. Their parents had pensions, their kids, maybe some of us, at least know from day one that we're on our own and can plan accordingly. But boomers got caught in the middle, told to follow the old playbook while playing a completely new game. So, where do we go from here? 3 things I took away from watching this unfold. First, never trust a system where the people designing it don't have to live with the consequences. The executives who eliminated pensions had their own golden parachutes. The politicians who encouraged 401ks had their own retirement plans. The incentives were never aligned. When someone tells you a new system is for your benefit, ask who else benefits and how much. Second, compounding is everything, but only if you have time. The math of retirement is ruthless. Start at 25, you need to save 10%. Start at 40, you need to save 30%. Start at 55, you need to save basically everything and hope nothing goes wrong. The window is real and it closes. Don't waste it waiting for the right time to start because there's no such thing. Third, diversify your concept of retirement. The idea that you work until 65 and then live on passive income is a 20th century invention that might not survive the 21st. Have skills that can earn money at any age. Build social capital. Stay useful. Because the 401k system was an experiment and the results are in, it doesn't work for most people. The next generation needs a different plan. The real reason boomers are retiring broke isn't because they were lazy or dumb. It's because they were handed a game board that looked like their parents' board, but played by completely different rules. They were told pensions would take care of them, then the pensions vanished. They were told to trust the market, but the market spent 2 decades either stagnant or crashing. They were told to save, but wages stayed flat while costs exploded. They became the test subjects for privatized retirement. And now, at 70, they're still working because the experiment failed. That's the system. That's the incentive structure. That's what happens when you transfer risk to individuals without giving them the tools or time to manage it. If you're younger than a boomer, learn from this. Don't assume the current system will be there when you need it. Build multiple income streams. Start yesterday. And maybe show some grace to the 70-year-old working at the grocery store. They're not there because they failed. They're there because the system did.